Clara Hayes believed old houses were time capsules, their walls saturated with the echoes of lives lived within. Inheriting the ancestral Blackwood estate in rural Massachusetts wasn't just about property, it was a lifeline to a past shrouded in silence, a chance to reconstruct the family history fractured by early deaths and estrangement. She arrived armed with an architectural historian's eye and a daughter's yearning. The house greeted her with an air of dusty grandeur, profound sadness, and the unnerving sense that its secrets were not merely hidden, but actively waiting, hungry, within the decaying framework of its existence. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. The gravel drive crunched under the tires of Clara's sedan, a sound swallowed almost immediately by the thick quiet of the surrounding woods. Blackwood Manor loomed ahead, stark against the bruised twilight sky. It wasn't grand in the Newport mansion sense, but possessed a severe, weathered beauty, clapboard siding gone gray, intricate gingerbread trim softened by decay, windows like dark, watchful eyes. An air of neglect clung to it, heavier than the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Clara cut the engine, the silence rushing back in, broken only by the distant call of a crow. For a moment, she just sat, gripping the steering wheel. This house held the key. Her grandmother, Eleanor, the last of the Blackwood line to reside here, had passed away years ago, leaving the house empty, stewarded by lawyers and caretakers Clara had never met. Her own parents, estranged from Eleanor, had offered little about the family's deeper history, preferring vague anecdotes to concrete facts. Now, with both parents gone too, this house, this imposing structure of wood and memory, was Clara's only tangible link. As an architectural preservationist, restoring it felt like the most natural, most vital way to excavate her roots. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dust, old paper, and something else. A faint, underlying coolness that had nothing to do enough with the autumn chill. Sunlight struggled through grimy window panes, illuminating dust motes dancing in long shafts. Furniture huddled under white sheets like ghostly congregations. Clara ran a hand along the banister of the main staircase, the dark wood cool and smooth beneath her fingers. It felt solid, real. A repository. Her first days were a whirlwind of assessment and discovery. She charted cracked plaster, noted water stains like fading maps on the ceilings, and marveled at the original hardwood floors hidden beneath layers of linoleum and cheap carpet. In the attic, amidst cobwebs and forgotten relics, she found them, boxes overflowing with the past. Photographs, brittle letters tied with faded ribbon, leather-bound diaries filled with looping script. It was a treasure trove. She spread the photographs across the dusty dining room table, a mosaic of forgotten faces. A stern-looking man with mud and sharp sideburns, her great-great-grandfather, perhaps? A group of children in stiff collars posing on the porch steps, the house looming behind them, looking younger but no less imposing. She picked up a photo of a woman with startlingly familiar eyes, Eleanor, her grandmother, as a young woman, vibrant and smiling, standing beside a man Clara didn't recognize. Later that evening, sorting through a box of letters, she paused. She'd been trying to decipher the signature on a particularly poignant letter describing a harsh winter in the early 1900s. She knew she'd identified the author just an hour ago, a name gleaned from another document, Josiah Blackwood, her great-uncle. She'd felt a flicker of connection, imagining him writing by candlelight as the wind howled outside. But now, the name was gone. Utterly blank. She stared at the signature, the loops and flourishes suddenly meaningless squiggles. Josiah, she whispered, trying to force the memory back. Nothing. A frustrating void where certainty had been moments before. She shook her head, rubbing her temples. Fatigue. It had to be. The long drive, the emotional weight of the place, the sheer volume of information she was trying to absorb. It was overwhelming. She packed up the letters, deciding to call it a night. The next morning, she tackled the small parlor off the main hall, a room Eleanor had apparently used as a study. As she measured the dimensions for her restoration notes, something felt off. The doorway leading into the room. Hadn't it seemed wider yesterday? She distinctly remembered thinking it was unusually generous for an interior door of its era. Now, it seemed standard, almost cramped. She pulled out her measuring tape. The reading confirmed its current, unremarkable width. She frowned, running her hand along the doorframe. Had she just misremembered? Stress could do strange things. Then her eyes caught the floorboards near the window. Yesterday, she'd noticed a peculiar swirling pattern in the wood grain, like a frozen eddy. She'd made a mental note to photograph it. Now, The pattern seemed simpler. Less distinct. Straightened out, almost. "Okay, Clara, you're officially losing it," she muttered, forcing a laugh. Houses settle. Old wood is character. Light plays tricks. There were rational explanations. Yet, a sliver of unease lodged itself in her chest, cold and persistent. It felt less like the house was settling, and more like it was adjusting. Shifting slightly in its sleep. Dismissing it as fanciful, she focused back on her work, pushing the unsettling feeling down, attributing it to the isolation and the weight of the history pressing in on her from all sides. The house held secrets, she knew. She just hadn't considered that the house itself might be one of them. The initial unease began to coalesce into a chilling pattern. It wasn't just fleeting forgetfulness, it was targeted, specific amnesia, directly linked to her research within Blackwood Manor. One rainy afternoon, Clara immersed herself in the life of Elspeth Blackwood, a great-aunt rumored to have been a gifted artist who died young. She found Elspeth's diary, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in what must have been her bedroom. The entries were filled with passionate descriptions of light, color, and a growing sense of melancholy. Clara felt a powerful kinship with this forgotten ancestor, poring over sketches tucked between the pages, tracing the lines of charcoal portraits that captured an almost painful sensitivity. She spent hours in that room, absorbing Elspeth's world, feeling her presence linger in the faded floral wallpaper. The next morning, Clara woke with a sense of purpose, eager to document Elspeth's story. She reached for her notes, then stopped. Elspeth. The name felt foreign. She could picture the diary, the sketches, the feeling of the room, but the woman herself, her name, the specific details she'd learned, they were frustratingly absent, like words dissolving on her tongue. She walked back to the bedroom, the diary still lying open on the small writing desk. The physical evidence was there, irrefutable. Yet, the knowledge she had gained within these walls, the connection she had forged, had been neatly excised from her mind overnight. A cold dread washed over her. It wasn't random. The house wasn't just passively holding memories, it seemed to be reacting to her remembering. The house itself began to change in more overt ways, mirroring the gaps in her knowledge. The room that had been Elspeth's, previously just dusty and melancholic, now felt distinctly colder than the rest of the upper floor, a chill that seemed to emanate from the very walls. One morning, Clara went to open the window in that room, the one Elspeth had described looking out of in her diary, only to find it boarded up crudely from the inside with weathered planks that looked disturbingly old, as if they'd been there for decades. Clara knew, with absolute certainty, that window had been clear glass the day before. Panic began to bubble beneath her professional calm. She searched frantically for a small, silver locket mentioned repeatedly in Elspeth's diary, an item Clara distinctly remembered finding tucked inside the diary's cover. She'd placed it carefully on the bedside table. Now, it was gone. Vanished without a trace. She searched the room, then the entire house, her movements becoming increasingly frantic. It wasn't misplaced, it was removed. As she stood in the center of Elspeth's room, heart pounding, a faint, unfamiliar scent drifted through the air, the delicate aroma of violets, Elspeth's favorite flower according to the diary Clara could no longer fully recall. It was there for a moment, ghostly and intimate, then faded, leaving only the scent of dust and cold. She needed an outside perspective. That evening, she called her older brother, Mark. He lived 3 states away, immersed in his tech job, generally detached from their tangled family history. "Hey, Mark," she began, trying to keep her voice steady. "How are things?" "Busy," he replied, his voice slightly distracted. "You know how it is. How's the haunted mansion treating you? Found any skeletons in the closets yet?" He chuckled. Clara hesitated. "Actually, Mark, things are a bit weird here." She explained the memory lapses, focusing on the Elspeth incident. She described the boarded-up window, the missing locket, trying to sound rational, factual. There was a pause on the other end. "Clara," Mark said, his tone shifting from joking to concerned. "That sounds stressful. Are you getting enough sleep? Eating properly? Maybe all that dust is getting to you. Have you checked for carbon monoxide? Old houses, faulty furnaces?" "Mark, I checked the detectors, they're fine. This isn't about dust or fatigue. I knew things yesterday that I don't know today. Things I learned in the house. And the house. It's changing. Small things, but they're real." "Changing how? Like, physically?" He sounded skeptical again. "Clara, houses creak. Things settle. Maybe you're just noticing stuff because you're looking so closely. And the memory thing. Grief can mess with your head, You know? Dealing with Grandma's stuff, the family history. It's a lot. Maybe you should take a break? Come visit for a weekend? I can't just leave, Clara insisted, frustration mounting. I'm trying to uncover our family's best, and it feels like the house itself is fighting me. Fighting you? Mark sighed. Okay, look. Take photos. Document everything. If a window boards itself up again, send me a picture. But seriously, consider seeing a doctor. Memory loss like that isn't normal, house-related or not. Clara hung up, feeling more isolated than ever. Mark's pragmatic dismissal, his logical explanations, only amplified her own creeping self-doubt. Was he right? Was she projecting her own internal fragmentation onto the building? But the boarded window, the missing locket, the chillingly specific amnesia. It felt too real, too targeted. The blueprint of the house felt like it was shifting, not just physically, but mnemonically, erasing pieces of its past as she tried to bring them to light. And the cold fear settling in her heart whispered that it might not stop with the house's memories. It might eventually come for hers. Clara's meticulously planned research began to unravel, sabotaged by an invisible, insidious force. She tried documenting her findings outside the house's influence, taking notes in her car or at the local library, but the core discoveries, the moments of connection forged within Blackwood Manor, remained vulnerable. Notes scribbled furiously in her journal while inside the house would inexplicably vanish by the next morning. Blank pages stared back where detailed observations about architectural quirks or diary entries had been. The ink hadn't faded, the pages were pristine, as if the words had never been written. Her laptop became another battleground. She started scanning letters and diary pages, hoping digital copies would be immune. But files related to specific ancestors she'd researched within the house, particularly those whose presence felt strong in certain rooms, would become corrupted overnight. JPEGs dissolved into pixelated static, Word documents refused to open, citing unknown errors. Backups saved to cloud storage while connected to the house's sluggish Wi-Fi inexplicably deleted themselves. It was targeted, systematic erasure. It wasn't faulty hardware or software bugs, it felt personal, defensive. The house wasn't just passively consuming memories, it was actively preventing her from preserving them, from carrying its history beyond its walls. Frustrated and increasingly unnerved, Clara sought refuge and resources at the Oak Haven Historical Society, a small, cluttered haven in the nearby town. Behind a desk piled high with books sat Mr. Elias Thorne, the retired librarian Mark had vaguely mentioned. He was an elderly man with sharp, observant eyes behind thick spectacles and hands stained with the ink of ages. When Clara introduced herself and mentioned she was restoring the Blackwood place, Thorne's expression became guarded, tinged with a strange mix of curiosity and pity. "Ah, the Blackwood house," he murmured, steepling his fingers. "Quite a place. Holds its history tight, that one." "That's what I'm trying to uncover," Clara said, hoping for some factual context, some grounding. "My family wasn't very forthcoming." Thorne peered at her over his glasses. "Perhaps for good reason. Folks who lived there. Well, stories get told. People change in that house. Or perhaps, the house changes them." He leaned forward conspiratorially. "Heard tell of Jeremiah Blackwood, built the place back in the 1880s. Obsessed, they said. Not just with building a home, but with containing things. Memories. Experiences. Wanted the house to be a vessel, a living record." He tapped a brittle county map. "And the land itself. Older legends speak of it being a place of thin spots, where thoughts get muddled, and the past bleeds through. Caused confusion, they said." Clara felt a chill despite the stuffy air of the archive room. Thorne wasn't offering ghost stories, he was echoing the unsettling reality she was experiencing. People changing. How? She pressed. "Became reclusive," Thorne said, his voice low. "Forgetful. Old man Hemlock, lived there in the 50s after the Blackwoods first moved out, used to wander town asking people his own name. And poor Mrs. Dubois, the artist who rented it briefly in the 70s. Vibrant woman, full of life. Left after 6 months, pale as a sheet, barely spoke a word. Said the house demanded too much." Thorne's words, meant perhaps as cautionary tales, struck Clara with the force of validation, yet simultaneously intensified her fear. He knew. Or at least, the town knew something was wrong with the house. But his historical anecdotes also painted her own experiences, the forgetfulness, the feeling of the house making demands, as part of a longer, more disturbing pattern. Returning to the isolating silence of Blackwood Manor that evening, Clara felt the walls closing in, both literally and figuratively. Mark's skepticism, Thorne's cryptic warnings, the technological impossibilities she faced daily, it was chipping away at her certainty, her sanity. Had she imagined the intricate pattern on the floorboards? Had she hallucinated the scent of violets? Was the stress of the renovation, the grief for her lost family, manifesting as elaborate delusions? She started implementing desperate countermeasures. Before entering a room she knew was associated with a specific ancestor, she'd record a voice memo on her phone, detailing her current knowledge, her intentions for research. She'd take time-stamped photos of her notes, emailing them to a separate account before leaving the room. She began carrying a small notebook and pen on her person at all times, jotting down immediate thoughts, observations, even mundane details of her day, trying to create an external record, an anchor against the encroaching fog. She was trying to catch the house in the act, to prove to herself that she wasn't fabricating the erosion of her own mind. But the fear lingered. What if the house wasn't just erasing the past? What if it was rewriting her present? The house's influence grew bolder, blurring the line between memory consumption and physical alteration. Clara had targeted a section of damaged plaster in the main hallway, a spiderweb of cracks radiating from a central impact point. She planned to repair it, meticulously documenting the damage first. Her research in the family archives unearthed a likely cause, a furious argument between her great-grandfather and his brother, detailed in a letter, culminating in a heavy object, perhaps a cane or ledger, being thrown against the wall in that exact spot. Clara spent an afternoon immersed in the faded ink, feeling the rage and resentment radiating from the brittle page, the memory of that familial conflict becoming sharp and vivid in her mind. The next morning, she approached the hallway with her tools, ready to begin the repair. She stopped dead. The plaster was smooth. Impossibly, flawlessly smooth. Not repaired, not batched, but pristine, as if the damage had never occurred. The texture matched the surrounding wall perfectly, though perhaps infinitesimally newer looking if one squinted. She ran her hand over the surface, searching for any seam, any sign of intervention. There was none. And as she stood there, bewildered, she tried to recall the details of the argument she'd read about just yesterday, the specific insults, the object thrown, the raw emotion. It was hazy. Distant. Like an old story heard secondhand, devoid of the visceral impact it had held just hours before. The house hadn't just consumed the memory, it had physically healed itself, erasing the evidence of the past event as it erased her recollection of it. The walls remembered only what she was allowed to forget. Conversely, as her own grasp on the researched past weakened, fragments of older, more thoroughly digested memories began to surface within the house. Objects appeared where none had been before, not part of her initial inventory. Tucked deep under the sagging armchair in the library, she found a child's wooden horse, its paint worn smooth by tiny hands, one rocker cracked. It hadn't been there when she'd cleaned the room upon arrival. On the dusty mantelpiece in the dining room, a pair of old-fashioned pince-nez spectacles materialized, perched precariously as if recently set down. In a little used upstairs bedroom, a faint indentation appeared on the pillow, deepening slightly each day, like an unseen head rested there nightly. These weren't her family's memories, she sensed, but remnants, echoes of lives absorbed long before her arrival, now bubbling to the surface like psychic residue as the house fed on newer recollections. It wasn't bringing memories back, it was regurgitating indigestible fragments. Mark, spurred by a mixture of brotherly concern and perhaps a lingering thread of disbelief he couldn't quite shake, drove up for the weekend. Clara, desperate for validation, practically dragged him through the house, pointing out the subtle shifts she'd observed. "See this doorway, Mark? I measured it. It was wider." "I know it was. Clara, maybe the frame settled unevenly," he offered, trying to be patient. "And Elspeth's room, the window," she insisted, leading him upstairs. "It was clear glass last week. Now look." She pointed at the crudely boarded-up window. Mark frowned, running his hand over the rough wood. "Okay, that's weird," he conceded. "Are you sure it wasn't like that before? Maybe hidden behind curtains?" There were no curtains. Clara felt a hysterical edge creeping into her voice. "And the locket? It was right here." Her desperation was palpable, but Mark still seemed poised to offer rationalizations, squatters, perhaps, or a prank by local kids, however unlikely given the isolation. Then, it happened. They were standing in the parlor, the room where Clara had first noticed the shifting floorboards. She was explaining her theory about the house feeding on memories, her voice low and urgent. "It takes the memories that are actively being recalled within its walls. Like when I was reading about the argument in the hall." Suddenly, Mark's eyes widened. He was staring at a small, porcelain figurine, a shepherdess, that sat on a side table. "Clara," he said slowly. "Where did that come from?" Clara looked. The shepherdess hadn't been there a moment ago. She knew it hadn't. It wasn't hers, nor part of the house's inventory she'd painstakingly compiled. I don't know," she stammered. As they both stared, the figurine seemed to shimmer slightly, then it simply vanished. Not knocked over, not fallen. It was there one second, gone the next. The air where it had been seemed to crackle faintly. Mark was silent for a long moment, his face pale. "Okay," he finally breathed. "Okay. That wasn't settling." Later that evening, trying to reconstruct the sequence of events for Mark, Clara faltered. "And then? After you saw the figurine disappear, what did we talk about next?" She frowned, genuinely confused. They had just discussed it minutes ago. Mark stared at her, a new kind of fear dawning in his eyes. "Clara. We were talking about the plaster wall. The argument. You were telling me how smooth it was." She looked at him, a terrifying blankness in her gaze. "The plaster wall?" she repeated vaguely. "Was it damaged?" Mark didn't answer. He just watched his sister, the meticulous historian, lose a piece of her immediate past right before his eyes. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a chilling certainty. Something was terribly wrong in Blackwood Manor, and it was consuming his sister piece by piece. The house, no longer content with the faded memories of long-dead ancestors, turned its attention fully onto its current occupant. It began consuming memories closer to Clara herself, targeting the foundations of her own identity. Faint recollections of childhood visits to Blackwood Manor, moments she hadn't even realized she possessed until the house dredged them up only to snatch them away, vanished entirely. A specific conversation with her grandmother Eleanor on the porch swing, the scent of her lavender perfume, the scratchy wool of her shawl, details that had surfaced with surprising clarity a week ago were now gone, leaving only a vague awareness that she had visited as a child, nothing more. More alarmingly, recent memories, formed since her arrival, started to fray. She struggled to clearly recall the details of Mark's visit just days earlier. Had he stayed one night or two? What exactly had they eaten for dinner? The certainty of the vanished figurine remained, a chilling anchor point, but the surrounding context grew fuzzy, unreliable. Appointments made while inside the house, a call with a contractor, a planned trip to the hardware store, evaporated from her mind, leading to missed calls and confused apologies. The house was no longer just erasing the past, it was actively consuming her present. Her behavior began to shift in subtle, unsettling ways. The meticulous architectural historian became listless, her carefully organized research notes devolving into scattered papers she couldn't quite focus on. Her systematic approach to restoration faltered, days were lost staring blankly at walls, tracing patterns in the dust with a fingertip, a profound sense of loss washing over her without knowing precisely what she was missing. She found herself humming tunes she didn't recognize, developing a sudden craving for Earl Grey tea, which she normally disliked, her grandmother's favorite. She caught herself standing in the posture of one of the stiffly posed ancestors in an old photograph, her hand resting on her hip in an unfamiliar, archaic way. It felt less like conscious imitation and more like involuntary channeling. Echoes of personalities absorbed long ago were bleeding into her own, filling the voids left by her stolen memories. She was becoming less Clara Hayes, more a composite entity, a vessel for the house's collection. Mark called daily now, his voice tight with worry. "Clara, you need to leave. Now. Lock the door and walk away. We can deal with the legal stuff later." "Leave?" Clara echoed, sounding distant, confused. "But the work. The history." "Damn the history," Mark exclaimed. "This thing is hurting you. You don't sound like yourself." "I'm fine, Mark," she insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "Just tired. There's so much to remember." The word hung in the air, tasting like irony. Alone in the oppressive silence, punctuated only by the creaks and sighs of the old structure, Clara wrestled with a terrifying theory. The house wasn't malicious, not in the human sense. It didn't hate her. It was perhaps more like a carnivorous plant, or a deep-sea organism surviving in the crushing darkness. It operated on instinct. It fed on the psychic resonance, the emotional energy embedded in memories tied intrinsically to its physical space. Strong memories, actively recalled memories, memories brimming with emotion, love, anger, grief, discovery, these were its nourishment. They sustained its strange existence, perhaps fulfilled the original architect Jeremiah Blackwood's mad design to create a structure that truly lived on the past. Her very act of researching, of remembering, of feeling within these walls, was like ringing a dinner bell. She wasn't just uncovering history, she was actively feeding the entity that consumed it. The more she tried to reclaim her family's best, the more of herself she offered up to the house's insatiable appetite. The path to connection was also the path to dissolution. Guided by a combination of Mr. Thorne's cryptic hints about the architect's obsession, he built a place within a place, they whispered. Where he kept the heart of it all, her own architectural intuition sensing an anomaly in the building's layout, and a section of wall that seemed to subtly shift, revealing the faint outline of a hidden doorway after she'd forgotten a particularly potent family secret learned nearby. Clara found it. Behind a false bookshelf in the original library, a section swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a narrow, descending staircase shrouded in darkness. The air that flowed up from below was different, colder, yet strangely electric, carrying the scent of ozone and something else, something metallic and organic, like old blood and dust mites. Hesitantly, she descended, flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive blackness. The stairs led to a small, circular room directly beneath the house's central core. It wasn't in any of the original blueprints she possessed. The geometry felt subtly wrong, the curve of the wall seeming to subtly twist, defying Euclidean expectations. There were no windows. The only light came from her flashlight, reflecting off strange, faintly iridescent materials embedded in the plaster. Mica? Crushed quartz? Something else entirely? In the center of the room sat a large, intricately detailed scale model of Blackwood Manor itself, crafted from dark wood and what looked disturbingly like yellowed bone. Tiny, meticulous details mirrored the house above, but some features seemed subtly different, hinting at past configurations or perhaps potential future ones. Around the model, embedded directly into the floor, were small, personal objects: a tarnished silver thimble, a child's tooth, a pressed flower, a shard of colored glass, a single cufflink. Relics. Anchors. This was the locus. The house's stomach, its processing core, its memory bank. The air hummed with latent energy. As Clara stepped fully into the room, the hidden door swinging shut behind her with a soft click, the assault began. It wasn't a sound or a sight, but an overwhelming psychic inundation. She gasped, dropping her flashlight, which sputtered and died. Darkness pressed in, but her mind exploded with light and sensation. Fragments of memory, not her own, flooded her consciousness: the terrified shriek of a child falling down the main stairs, the taste of whiskey and cigar smoke in a smoke-filled parlor, the overwhelming grief of the woman receiving a telegram, the passionate whispers of lovers in a hidden alcove, the quiet desperation of Elspeth watching rain streak the windowpane, the chilling resolve of Jeremiah Blackwood mixing mortar with something else. Decades, centuries perhaps, of intense emotional moments experienced within the house washed over her: sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations, raw emotions, chaotic, overlapping, deafening. Simultaneously, she felt a sickening pull, a targeted intrusion into her own mind. Threads of her core memories, her mother's face, Mark's laughter, the pride of completing her first restoration project, the very sense of being Clara, felt like they were being drawn out, stretched thin, pulled towards the central model like iron filings to a magnet. The house wasn't just bombarding her, it was actively trying to reel her in, to absorb her into the cacophony. Amidst the storm, flickers of understanding pierced through. Evidence lay scattered around the locus, ignored in her initial shock. Scrawled notes tucked beneath the model, diagrams etched into the strange wall material, spoke of resonance, psychic energy, architectural harmonics designed to capture and store mnemonic imprints. Jeremiah Blackwood hadn't just wanted to contain the past, he'd sought to create a perpetual engine fueled by human experience, perhaps seeking a form of immortality by absorbing the lives lived within his creation, or maybe it was a disastrously failed experiment in preserving consciousness. The mechanism was arcane, blending strange physics with architectural design, using the very materials of the house as a psychic net. She saw it now: the house didn't just eat memories, it metabolized them, using their energy to sustain its unnatural state, to subtly reshape itself, to reinforce the locus. And it was starving for more. The locus became actively hostile. The click of the door locking wasn't just a sound, it felt like a final punctuation mark. The non-Euclidean angles of the room seemed to subtly shift, inducing vertigo and disorientation. The psychic storm intensified, no longer just chaotic fragments, but targeted assaults focusing on Clara's deepest emotional anchors. A vivid, perfect memory of her mother tucking her into bed, singing a lullaby, a memory she cherished, flashed before her inner eye, then began to fray at the edges, the tune distorting, her mother's face blurring, the feeling of safety curdling into dread as the house tried to wrench it away. Then came the whispers, insidious tendrils weaving through the mnemonic chaos. "Stay, Clara. You can keep them safe here. All the memories. Your family. Yourself. Preserved. Forever." A comforting image formed in her mind, herself, serene, seated beside the model, becoming the eternal guardian of the Blackwood legacy, every lost relative held safe within the house's embrace, and within her. She saw Elspeth's face, smiling, thanking her. She felt her grandmother's presence, approving. The temptation was sickeningly potent, to surrender, to merge, to find peace in oblivion and preservation. But another image broke through, Mark's worried face, his desperate pleas for her to leave. The sharp, metallic tang of fear that had accompanied the vanishing figurine. The chilling smoothness of the healed plaster. This wasn't preservation, it was consumption. Annihilation of the self. She scrambled back towards the door, hands scrabbling against the strangely angled wall. It felt solid, unyielding. Panic clawed at her throat. The house pulsed around her, the locust drawing harder on her core identity, trying to pull her under, to make her forget the desire to leave. Just rest, Clara. Let go. She needed to fight back, but how? Destroy the locust? It felt integrated into the very foundation, ancient and resilient. Starve it? She was its only current food source. Then, her eyes fell on the scattered objects on the floor, the anchors. And she thought of the trove in the attic, the boxes of letters, diaries, photographs. Her entire research archive. A concentrated repository of memory and emotion, painstakingly gathered. It was a desperate gamble. Feed the house something else. Overload it. Appease it, just long enough to escape. The decision crystallized. Escape meant accepting the loss, the family history she came to find would remain trapped here, large parts of her own recent experiences likely devoured. Staying meant utter annihilation. Merging was a comforting lie. With a surge of adrenaline fueled by pure terror, Clara turned her back on the locust door and scrambled back up the narrow stairs, the psychic pull lessening slightly as her physical distance increased, though the disorienting memory fragments still battered her mind. She burst back into the library, slamming the false bookshelf shut, hoping to momentarily disrupt the locust's direct influence. She raced through the house, ignoring the creaks and whispers that seemed to follow her, grabbing the boxes of archival materials, Elspeth's diary, the letters detailing the family feud, photographs spanning generations, her own research notes that hadn't yet vanished. It felt like tearing out her own heart, sacrificing the very history she'd come to save. Stumbling back down the hidden stairs, the psychic pressure building again as she neared the locust, she kicked open the door. The room seemed to pulse with anticipation. Without allowing herself to hesitate, Clara hurled the boxes towards the central model. Papers flew, photographs scattered, diaries tumbled open. She screamed, pouring all her fear, her frustration, her grief into the act, offering up this concentrated feast of the past. The effect was instantaneous. The locust seemed to recoil, then surge. The humming intensified to a deafening roar. The air crackled, flashing with internal light. The memory storm became a hurricane, but it felt unfocused, overwhelmed by the sudden influx of raw mnemonic data. The pull on Clara's own mind lessened, distracted by the richer meal. This was her chance. She lunged for the door, expecting it to resist, to trap her. But in its moment of gluttonous distraction, the house's control seemed momentarily disrupted. The door wasn't locked. She wrenched it open and fled up the stairs, not daring to look back, the psychic roar of the locust echoing behind her. She slammed the hidden panel shut, ramming a heavy library chair against it, a futile gesture she knew wouldn't hold, but it felt necessary. She didn't stop running until she was out the front door, gasping in the cold, clean air, the silence of the woods a stark contrast to the chaos she'd escaped. She didn't look back at Blackwood Manor. She couldn't. Mark found her hours later, parked by the side of the road miles away from the house, staring blankly at the dashboard. She was physically unharmed but seemed hollowed out, her eyes vacant. She remembered escaping, the overwhelming psychic noise, the desperate act of sacrificing the archives. But the specifics of her time within the locust were gone, wiped clean. Large swaths of the family history she had uncovered were inaccessible, locked away not just in the house, but erased from her own mind. Even the sharp fear and determination that fueled her escape felt muted, distant. She never returned to Blackwood Manor. Lawyers were engaged, impenetrable clauses invoked, and the property was eventually condemned, deemed structurally unsound, a convenient fiction that masked an inconvenient, unbelievable truth. It stood empty, isolated, radiating a palpable wrongness that kept even vandals away. The woods seemed to encroach upon it more quickly than nature should allow, reclaiming the space. The family history Clara had sought remained within its walls, consumed, digested, forever beyond her reach. Years passed. Clara rebuilt her life, continuing her work in architectural preservation, though she avoided projects involving isolated, overly historical family homes. She lived a functional existence, successful even, but the gaps remained. There were blank spots in her memory concerning her family, particularly her grandmother and the events leading up to inheriting the house. Sometimes, she'd find herself possessing inexplicable knowledge, a sudden fluency in a particular style of 19th-century joinery she'd never formally studied, or an uncanny ability to identify obscure Victorian mourning rituals. Fragments, perhaps, absorbed from the house's collection, integrated into the void where her own memories used to be. Other times, she experienced profound moments of jamais vu, looking at familiar streets in her own city and feeling an unsettling sense of unreality, as if seeing them for the first time. The anchor points of her own lived experience sometimes felt thin, unreliable. The most haunting moments came unexpectedly. One afternoon, sorting through old belongings Mark had salvaged from her parents' home, she found a small, framed photograph. It showed a little girl with bright, curious eyes and pigtails, standing on the porch steps of Blackwood Manor, her hand resting tentatively on the dark wood of the railing. Sunlight caught the gingerbread trim above her head. Clara knew, intellectually, that the girl in the photograph was her. She recognized the missing front tooth, the favorite overalls. But as she stared at the image, she felt nothing. No flicker of recognition, no warmth of nostalgia, no emotional connection whatsoever. It was like looking at a picture of a complete stranger, a child who lived a life entirely separate from her own. The house hadn't just eaten memories of events or ancestors. It hadn't just consumed the physical archives. It had devoured pieces of her identity, excised fragments of her soul, leaving behind a renovated self, functional, intact on the surface, but forever haunted by the echoes of what was lost and the chilling awareness of the empty spaces within. The past wasn't just forgotten, for Clara, part of it had never existed at all. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.